everyone, it's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're here for the first time. Each week I take a little bit of time and talk about the weekly news in the aquatic industry. This is going to be shared in the newsletter that is linked down below. Today we're going to be talking about the July 10th, 2026 newsletter, and there's not really a huge theme to this week's newsletter. You can access the newsletter in the description box down below. I have it linked. You can subscribe to receive the newsletter each week. It comes out on Wednesdays. This week, I was definitely a little bit behind. It is summer. It's busy for everyone. So I do apologize that it didn't go out on Wednesday. It went out on Friday. It was a little bit interesting because usually most weeks I have a very clear topic that I want to cover. Like there's not usually any there's not usually any question about what I'm going to cover. Usually it's very apparent to me what I'm going to talk about. And I don't know if it's just because it was very, very slow the first part of July. We had Canada Day here in Canada. The United States celebrated the 250th anniversary of the founding. Last weekend was the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce wedding in New York City. None of these things have a direct application on my personal life here in Alberta or in most people's lives, for those of you aquatic professionals. But it did feel like a really slow news period the first 10 days of July. And nothing significant was really happening. And so I didn't feel that I should waste anybody's time and invent an op-ed to start the newsletter. Each week I do try and talk about something, but after waiting a day and a half, 2 days, the newsletter was late. I thought, you know what? I just don't have any words of wisdom this week. So we'll jump straight into the news. I thought it was interesting because I've been doing this updated newsletter for 2.5 years now. We've had a newsletter for many, many years, but I refreshed it, updated it about 2.5 years ago. And this is the first time that that's really happened. Quick reminder, if you're new here, if you haven't listened to these YouTube lives before, I'm going to talk about the different articles that are linked in the newsletter, which is linked down below. I'm not going to be reading the articles from start to finish, but I'm going to be using my time with you now to share more context, give more information about why I think the topic is relevant to aquatic professionals, where I think this trend is going, if there is a trend, or what this topic means. If you're looking for more detail, do keep in mind that the actual news articles are linked in the newsletter. And so that can be your jumping off point if you're looking for more information. 2 weeks ago, for those of you based here in Alberta, Alberta Health Services they did make some updates to the documentation that is required for anti-entrapment compliance here in Alberta. So I recognize that many people who receive the newsletter are not based in Alberta, but this was a significant enough set of tweaks to the forms and the instructions that I did want to make sure that that was included in the newsletter for this week. You can download those documents from the AHS website. We do also have them linked on the Lakeview Aquatic Consultants website. If you go to the regulations tab in the menu at the top of the page, you can click down to all of the different legacy links. And the links that you may have bookmarked from before will still work, but you'll notice at the bottom of the document that loads, it should be dated June 2026. So you do want to make sure that you are downloading the updated documents for your files and reference if you are working here in Alberta day to day. I do also want to let you know that Alberta Health Services also came out with a cold plunge guidance document a few weeks ago. I did film a video about that, and so I will be sharing that on the YouTube channel and in an upcoming newsletter as soon as I can get that in queue to be edited. The rest of the news this week was pretty wide-ranging, with one exception and a story that I don't think has made an impact in a way that it should. There was a report out of California that an ex-state park superintendent is accused of secretly recording naked lifeguards on the job. So, this is a horrific story coming out of California. And the allegation, as I've read it, is that the warrant, like the search warrant, was served on this individual in summer of 2025. The individual was allowed to retire, and more information has only come to light a year later as this case winds its way through the judicial process. I truly do not know why more aquatic professionals are not talking about this, other than perhaps it is the height of pool season, it's July. And for all of those reasons that I mentioned earlier, Canada Day, US Independence Day, people are just trying to hold it together in terms of covering for vacations, covering staff hours. It's really, really hot. So it is very possible that people are just not noticing this issue the same way I have noticed that our views and our likes and on our engagement on Facebook and Instagram has been down, not because we've changed the content that we're sharing, but it's July. People are at weddings, people are on holidays, people are spending time with their kids who are out of school. But this report out of California should be a huge wake-up call. This is such a terrible thing in terms of the victims who were impacted. There are reports that at least 23 male lifeguards are included in over 2 million photos and videos that were found from what it sounds like was a staff room area, like a private changing room, private shower that is geared towards lifeguards at this park in California. So this is something I will continue to follow closely. I hope that it's um, not gaining traction because people don't care or because it's male victims over female victims. Everybody should be horrified by the degree of violation and the exposure that these employees, individual victims, experienced on the job in an environment where, speaking as a swimmer and a lifeguard and a swim instructor, yes, we're half naked in bathing suits. We're used to changing, and it's a different workplace from maybe an office, but that's still no excuse for the scale and scope of this crime against these individuals who, were violated. And we don't know yet. There hasn't been a ton of articles, which is really concerning. I think more information will come out. It's going to take some time. But we don't know where these files were stored, who accessed them, if they were shared, if they exist on the dark web, if people are identifiable. Like, it's really just the starting point of a long journey. And I feel so badly for the victims in this incident, as well as their colleagues. I mean, I would feel terrible to know that my colleagues were filmed and I wasn't in the same space. And I think that also begs the question, was the system turned on and off? Like, was the camera actively turned on, actively turned off? How is it focused on men versus women? I have so many questions, and I was really discouraged to see that almost nobody is talking about this article. I have reached out to some people to talk about this topic further, but at this point in time, those of you who followed me before on social media or on YouTube, I'm not comfortable speculating when there's an absence of information. I don't think it's beneficial just to invent commentary or conjecture when we don't have the facts. The main two articles I saw this week, I have shared those in the newsletter, and I will keep you posted as I have with other ongoing topics this year, like Camp Mystic, like sexual harassment in aquatics, or other things like that we've been following, the Kids Pool in BC, or the Cultus Lake water park incident. Speaking of Cultus Lake, there have not been any developments in the news other than the statement that the park will remain closed until mid-July. Now, I think it is worth noting that, as I said in the newsletter, it is very concerning to me that this incident and the PR response is not front and center on their website. It still falls below the page break, meaning you have to scroll down on their website to be made aware that the park is not open and that there has been this horrible incident that occurred in June. In case you're listening to this video without any previous context, A bunch of school children were at Cultus Lake Water Park in British Columbia, and they experienced an electrocution incident touching what they believe is a handrail approaching the water slide, not on the water slide. 2 children were life flighted by helicopter air ambulance to hospital in Vancouver. Other children were locally hospitalized and discharged. The park is undergoing remediation under the directive of Technical Safety BC, who inspects and administers amusement devices there. We will get a full report in public disclosure eventually when there is a conclusion, but as of right now, they are in the remediation process to rectify what has been stated as, quote, non-compliant electrical. And as I said in last week's newsletter, we don't know the scale, the scope, the intent. Did something wear out? Was something incorrectly installed? Was it the incorrect application? We don't know at this point. But I would be personally very surprised, in my opinion, if the water park does proceed with opening at all in summer 2026. As a business owner, I understand the catastrophic reality of not opening for this organization, for this business. They are only open for, let's say, 3 to 5 months a year to make the bulk of their revenue. So not opening for the entire summer is going to be financially catastrophic. But I don't see a path forward how it would make sense at this point in time, even if the electrical work is positively resolved and inspected by Technical Safety BC in the next couple of weeks. I'm recording this chat on Sunday, July 12th. And even if it is cleared to open in the next week or two, and there is good weather in interior British Columbia until mid-September, early October, especially for weekend-only water parks, in my opinion, and I'm not a public relations specialist, I'm just not sure that the public-facing perception of the organization is worth, in my opinion, reopening at this point in time without a full disclosure of what happened, as well as I am personally interested to know the status and health of the children who were in serious condition, as well as those who were life flighted. I'm not suggesting that we abuse the family's privacies and ask for details that we are not entitled to, but I think it is remarkable as well that I haven't seen any reports in traditional mainstream journalism or on social media stating that all the kids are now okay. Maybe they are okay. They've all been discharged from hospital with no long-term care issues, but I am genuinely concerned about the families and the victims in this incident as well. So I personally don't see a path forward reopening this year. I'm not suggesting that the park, the organization, should not reopen in 2027 with appropriate guidance and procedures and insurance and technical certification, but I don't see how it's going to happen this year, in my opinion. So kind of a non-update, if that makes sense. The update is we're not reopening yet, but we'll wait and see what happens. Another big update we got this week that was important, but also disturbing. This was an incident earlier in the winter. Some of you might recall this toddler who was found alive in the hospital morgue after being pronounced dead by an Arizona doctor. And the reason this article is in our newsletter is because it was based on alleged drowning fatality. So the reason this article or this story is back in the news is we now have public records that have been released by the police department who was party to this incident. So as we understood at the time, it was a fairly normal, unfortunately, this is very common in states with hotter climates, fairly normal residential pool drowning fatality of a young child who accessed the pool and was then found by family members who attempted to resuscitate them. However, where the stories diverge is that the child was taken to hospital, and it appears now from the incident reporting that was released through public disclosure that the doctor in the hospital declared the child dead, while the lay responders, so the police officers who were still at the scene in the hospital, as well as potentially a nurse, documented allegedly signs of life including the nurse finding a pulse, a police officer noticing noises and breathing that they documented in their police report for over an hour. The child was taken to the morgue, and then later they were found to be alive. Now, those of you who work in aquatics as lifeguards know that, vomiting, breathing, coughing, gurgling is not inherently a sign of life. The body can have experienced a submersion and vomit on its own or gurgle on its own. I always think back to my freshman year in college. My roommate, she'd gone binge drinking, and I woke up in the middle of the night to her throwing up in her bed on her back, and I turned her over and she threw up all over her sheets. And then in the morning, she had no recollection of this because she was so drunk when she said, well, why is there vomit on my sheets? Why is there this? And I said, you were literally vomiting on your back. Thankfully, I turned you over. You didn't choke on your vomit, but she had no recollection of it, which is could be similar in drowning incidents where we don't know, the victim's state is not necessarily identifiable by these signs. They're not pure signs of life on their own. But this is a really surprising story now because it does make us question the doctor who signed off on the death. And I think it will cause further investigation, potentially legal action by the family. I hope the child is well. I hope the child does not have any long-term care issues from having care stopped and being taken to the morgue. But as I understand it, that is why these this is why the public disclosure by the police department has occurred, because people like me had real questions like, how does this possibly happen? And now it looks like there was some degree of hubris on the part of the doctor, who was not necessarily open to comments from other people in the room. And we don't have the full story. Like maybe the parents were there, maybe there were other caregivers also making these types of comments, but at a minimum on the police report, which I haven't seen, I could do a freedom of information request, but I believe the reporting that the police officers state, we documented signs of life for over an hour. A nurse found a pulse. Like that's pretty bad to hear that in the context of a child that we know was found alive later. In terms of other articles I shared this week, I shared a story regarding a Russian group who hacked a Quebec, which is a province here in Canada, a Quebec water treatment plant, and they gained access to control of the pumps and chlorine dosing. This is an area that I don't mean to be alarmist, but is an area I think the average aquatic professional is unaware of some of the privacy and security issues. I am connected to this work through my own household and people in my family who do security and privacy work, and the way in which some of these systems, whether we're talking about airplane systems, elevator systems, building management systems, BMS systems, and then large-scale operational systems like city water can be hacked or compromised. So I don't want to start a panic, but it is something I think we're going to see more discussed in terms of security and privacy and data storage, as well as air gaps and the ways in which we can make these systems more secure than they currently are. Also this week, I shared an article that I was featured in from Brianna at LifeFloor. She wrote a great article for the National Recreation and Parks Association magazine, the July edition. We talk about regular maintenance being integral to positive pool experiences for bathers. If you're listening to this video, I know you're on the same train as me, where water quality, maintenance, all of that is our number one product when it comes to being successful. But it is still worth mentioning because often it is not neglected, but it is not a perspective that is shared by everyone. We're still talking about Meta and the smart glasses. Snapchat has also come out with smart glasses recently. And so I shared an article pertaining to this ongoing discussion we've been having about privacy legislation, as well as the usage of these items in areas with nudity. So for example, today I went to the gym, I was in the change room, I'm a glasses wearer, my glasses are normal, but do we need to be on the lookout for glasses that are recording, right? That is something we've talked about a lot this year. Another significant article this week is that the Minnesota Supreme Court is going to hear the case over Airbnb-style backyard pool rentals. So you might recall I've been really following this topic for the last couple of years, including this year a presentation I did at the Southwest Pool and Spa Show regarding the commercial use of residential pools. We've seen a lot of states and individual jurisdictions, counties and cities back down due to the efforts, the finances, and the resources backed by these companies to promote their commercial interests in increasing access to commercial rentals of residential areas. So I'm not surprised that they're taking this to the Minnesota Supreme Court, because this will create, in my opinion, a bad precedent, legal precedent if Minnesota rules one way or the other. So I'm going to be very curious to see what happens in this case, but I'm sure we're looking at, 8 to 10 months for the case to be heard and the decision to be rendered. Summer McIntosh, a Canadian swimmer, just broke the world record for butterfly. And the cool thing about this record that she broke is that she actually broke one of the supersuit era records back from 2009. So I'm not a huge, I don't follow competitive swimming that much, but I do follow kind of the headlines when there are big events like this. And if you might recall back in 2009, 2008, and I was working on pool decks when people would wear these super suits. You might remember Michael Phelps wearing a full body, so wrist to ankle. It would take 15 minutes to kind of shimmy into the super suit. The super suit would provide some lift to the surface of the water. And the allegation, the reason they were banned, is that it created unfair advantages, and it resulted in times that were not indicative of human performance. So for her to break a record set during that period is pretty incredible. And she is definitely on the roster that most of us are expecting to see Summer McIntosh swim again in 2028 Olympics in LA. One of the other articles I shared this week was talking about shower policies. I probably could have made an op-ed about this one, but it's either you get it or you don't, in my experience. Does your organization allow people to shower, like pay to shower, without using the pool? So I'm not talking about homeless or unhoused people. I'm talking about things like campers, workers in the community like truckers who are looking for a shower. We used to do this at one of my pools. We provided a wristband, so we knew the person couldn't go in to swim, and we monitored to make sure they're not spending 4 hours in the change rooms. Most people would come in with their shower bag, like typically a truck driver. They have their shower bag. They want to pay $2. They have, a 30-minute comfortable shower, do what they need to do, and then they leave. And this was a valuable source of revenue for us, as well as actually a resource for the community, because I was in a small town and none of our truck stops had showers, but we were in a part of Alberta that was quite a distance on the way to Fort McMurray, or a long, 6-8 hour drive. So it made complete sense. But then I also know some organizations don't feel that this is something that they should be doing, that it interferes with the administration of the facility. And so that was part of the reason I shared this article. I'm not saying your organization should do it or not do it. There are reasons for both, but it was definitely something that I have direct experience in, offering. And I think there's a reason to offer it at lots of facilities. I shared an article about the return to swim sites in the Seine River in Paris, which is not something I would swim in, but is an ongoing topic since the Paris Olympics in 2024. I shared a cool document that I really liked out of the Royal Life Saving Society UK. It is a policy on what is called reasonable adjustment and special consideration, which I think is something that is relevant when we talk about the video I did recently regarding deaf lifeguards, Or I recall once I trained a one-armed person in CPR. It was a teenager who had been born only with one arm, and how could she achieve the depth, the rate, the rhythm for proper CPR? She could do it, but what would be the reasonable adjustments and special considerations to make sure that she meets the purpose of the standard and can still achieve the award, that sort of thing. Also this week, a teen drowned during their Duke of Edinburgh expedition. The Duke of Edinburgh Awards, bronze, silver, and gold, is a program from the Duke of Edinburgh in the UK. It is a youth leadership program. I did my bronze and silver award. It is administered locally by groups like schools or youth groups, and then you do certain volunteering, certain skill development, and you get this accreditation or recognition. So I was a bit shocked to see that a teen drowned fatally during their Duke of Ed expedition. Typically, these are not fly-by-night things. You plan them well in advance, resources, there's a lot you have to do. So it was a bit shocking to see this happen. Certainly things, accidents can happen, but I think we need more details on exactly what happened, because I believe they were in their gold award expedition. That is not something you undertake lightly this weekend. There's a lot of planning and documentation that goes into something like that, because the documentation is also part of proving that you achieved the award. Buffalo has introduced a free pool membership ID system because they are trying to track attendance. As well as, I love this, people have to provide an emergency contact. So staff can contact parents or family members if there is an incident. And I think this is really important for tracking because, as I recall, they are moving forward with free swimming this summer. And free swimming can't be a free-for-all. So I'm not suggesting we turn people away without ID. Kids don't have ID, but we do need a mechanism to track our usage and our attendance because of our funding, as well as in terms of if there are crimes that occur, how do we figure out who was there and how do we follow up with parents? There was a drowning recently where I shared that the boy was found in the bottom of the pool because the pool was very cloudy based on poor water quality conditions. Chemical content resulted in the water appearing to be shallow, and it was actually very deep, and the body was at the bottom. So those of you who've taken the certified pool operator class with me before know that I really, really harp on water quality. Water quality is so important for safety, and this is a great example of that. Last few articles this week, I shared a great aerial drone shot of this pool design that I love. I shared some articles, including one is an audio you can listen to regarding kids with autism. It kind of gets into the why in a 6-minute feature that's really good if you don't know why kids with autism are more likely to experience drowning or fatal drowning. A pool that I first saw back in Chester, UK, a few years ago while visiting Ruth Lee, the company that makes the Lifeguard rescue mannequins in Wales. One of the pools that was closed when I visited, this old heritage Victorian bath, has reopened, which was really great to see. And there is a developing story out of Louisville where 6 different pools have been shut down because of the fact that they tested positive for bacteria. I think, unfortunately, you guys might have seen also in the news, there's some concerns with vegetables this week, lettuce, people getting very sick from salads in the United States, diarrhea symptoms. So in my opinion, there may be some interconnectivity there. The same way we've seen, issues with carrot juice or romaine lettuce, things can easily spread, especially if there's a delay with people's illness today, but they were asymptomatic for the initial few days that they may have contaminated the water at their local pool or taken their kids to swim lessons. Kitchener, Ontario is getting the first large-scale stainless steel pool in Canada. There is a stainless steel pool installed in Bella Coola, British Columbia. The last couple of years that project was done, but respectfully, that's a pretty remote region that most people are not going to have the opportunity to visit. Somewhere like Kitchener, Ontario is in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, southwestern Ontario. So to see that large municipal pool going in made of stainless steel is pretty remarkable. Stainless steel pools have not really taken off here in Canada yet. They're very popular in Europe. Yeah, I just think it's notable anytime we see a new installation or a new application. The state of New Jersey recently recognized open water or surf ocean lifeguards as first responders. And then I also shared a opinion piece from one of the parents whose child died at Camp Mystic last summer, because it really caused me to have a new perspective that I hadn't previously considered. If the parents of Heavens 27 had not committed themselves to uncovering the truth, this is me reading the quote, it is entirely possible that the events of that night would have faded from public scrutiny and escaped meaningful accountability. And I think that's so true. We only really know what happened through the public hearings, through the investigation and the report. It's a private business. If nobody had pushed for this, we would not have known that there was over 30 adults on the property, none of whom who helped rescue the children. Or we would not have known the detailed timeline where the co-director of the camp, Dick Eastland, was tracking the weather for hours before the incident occurred. I will spare you rehashing that video. If you haven't watched that video, I spent 2 hours a couple weeks ago going through the report in great detail. It is a devastating report. It's very upsetting, but I will link to it down below. I would encourage you to give that one a listen. All of these videos are geared as a listen. Like, you can see me in the corner. Hi, I'm here. This is not for aesthetics, though. It's for you to listen to me talk about these articles, provide some context why I think they're important. And the camp industry is something that I'm qualified to speak on as a former summer camp counselor for many, many years. I don't think I'm biased in terms of thinking that camps are perfect or safe. They are businesses that are looking to make a profit, and they're concerned about margins and what they can do to save money. But I know I was really, really horrified to discover the extent of which the incident was preventable. No different from, for example, Netflix just released the new Costa Concordia disaster documentary in the last few days. And it was sent to me by lots of different friends who know I love to cruise. I know about the Costa Concordia incident. This is the one where the Costa cruise ship was close to Giglio Island near Tuscany. This was back in early 2010s, like 2012 or 2011. And I knew most of the details that were included in the documentary, where the captain was close to shore. They were doing a sail by at a very high rate of speed. In the documentary, they discussed that they were sailing at 16.3 knots, which is open ocean cruising, not sail by the rocks cruising. But it was a very terrible incident where the captain, the boat hit some rocks. The captain did not give the order to abandon ship. The documentary reconstructing the black box recordings from the bridge does make it appear as though the captain was in denial for 20 to 30 to 40 minutes. And reports that have been widely circulated do show that the captain fled the vessel in a lifeboat long before the vessel was free of all the passengers or crew. And the master or the captain is meant to stay on the ship until the end. They don't need to die on the ship, but they are meant to direct evacuation and rescue. And there's some particularly egregious audio coverage as well with the Italian Coast Guard, where they misrepresent the degree to which they were having issues with the vessel before it started sinking. They only told the Italian Coast Guard regarding a power outage, blackout, even though they were aware that they had hit a rock and that the vessel had taken on water. So where I'm going with that sidebar is I enjoy cruising. I know cruising is not universally safe. There's always a risk of a ship sinking and the type of disaster that the Costa Concordia had. But I do think that investigating what happened and knowing the conditions can inform cruisers or the cruise industry, the degree to which they want to participate. So some of the staff that they interviewed in the documentary said, yeah, I never did cruising ever again. They were not comfortable with that, as opposed to, for example, my stateroom attendant back in February of 2026 on Explorer of the Seas. He now works for Royal Caribbean Cruise Line because he also survived that disaster. He had shared with me his experience that night and then was stranded in Italy for several weeks because he didn't have a passport, didn't have a wallet, didn't have a, very, very difficult scenario. But the only way we know about these incidents is really digging into them further and investigating to learn how not to have it happen again. Lastly, this week, I did finally release my World Water Park Association conference and trade show vlog from last fall. Yes, 9 months ago, but I won't be able to attend the conference this year in 2026. So I'm happy I got that out. It's a great conference. Highly recommend it. It will be in Vegas this year. I'm not able to attend. I have a conflict. I also, since I posted this newsletter, I did also release our Typhoon Lagoon reunion party vlog. So walking around the water park at night for our private event. That is a separate video on the channel that is also linked in the newsletter, as well as on the playlist. And then last but not least, Paige Lacroix, my friend at Shining Star Swim School, she let me repost a podcast that we recorded in early 2020 to our YouTube channel in full, because she's discontinued with the podcast and she's no longer paying the hosting fees on her website. And I was concerned about the podcast just disappearing completely, which is what I experienced recently when I went to go link to another podcast I had done in 2019, and it's just gone because they stopped paying their website host fees. So I think I'm going to try and put a copy of that podcast on our YouTube channel as well later this year. I did try and contact the original podcast hosts to ask for permission. Understandably, the email I had, I got no response. The phone number I had, I got no response. I'm going to give it another few weeks because I don't want to steal anyone's intellectual property, but I'm really proud of those podcasts, and I wish that I can also showcase them on our YouTube channel. So a big thank you to Paige, who immediately said, yes, of course, put it on YouTube. We want it to live on beyond, Spotify and a few other places on the internet. That's it for this week. Apologies for the delay getting this up to you, getting the newsletter out. I will be back in just a few short days. I'm recording this on Sunday. The newsletter goes out on Wednesday. And I will be back with you to share whatever crosses my eyes, crosses my desks, crosses my interests. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you. We will catch you in the next video. Bye for now.